When you deliver pizzas for a living, you see a cross-section of humanity. You go to frat houses, quiet suburban homes, and sketchy apartment buildings, all in the same shift. 99% of the time, it's boringly normal, but that other 1%, that's where the stories are. That's when you get a call that takes you to an address that feels wrong, a house that's too new, too quiet, and a customer who seems less like a person and more like a performance. I had one of those deliveries, and it made me realize that some people aren't just ordering dinner. They're ordering an audience. I was working for a local place called Gino's, slinging pies to pay for my community college textbooks. It was a miserable, rainy October Tuesday, the kind of night where the whole world feels gray and damp. We were about to close up when one last order came through the online portal. A large pepperoni and a 2-liter of soda. Cash payment. The address was for a new subdivision on the far west edge of town called Creekwood Estates. I'd seen the billboards, but I'd never actually been out there. It was a massive new development, still mostly under construction. A place of future homes that were currently just skeletons of timber and plastic wrap. The manager almost canceled the order because of the distance and the weather, but the tip was preset at $20. For that kind of money, I'd have delivered to the moon. I grabbed the pizza bag, plugged the address into my phone, and headed out into the rain. The farther I drove, the newer and sparser the houses became, until I finally turned onto the road for the estate. It was barely a road at all, just grated dirt and gravel that had turned to a soupy mud in the rain. My little sedan struggled through it. All the houses were in various states of construction, dark and silent husks. It was a ghost town in the making. My GPS told me I had arrived, but the house it indicated was the only one on the entire street that looked completely finished. It was a 2-story beige house with a perfect lawn that had no business being so green and manicured in the middle of a construction site. Every light in the house was on, making it blaze against the oppressive darkness of the rainy night. It looked less like a home and more like an advertisement for one. There were no cars in the driveway, no toys on the lawn, no sign of life at all besides the light. I felt a weird prickle of unease as I pulled up. I grabbed the pizza bag and walked to the front door. The air was unnaturally still. The only sound was the drumming of rain on the roof. The doorbell was a plastic placeholder with no button, so I knocked. After a moment, the door was opened by a man who looked to be in his early 40s. He was wearing a perfectly pressed gray suit, completely out of place for a Tuesday night at home. His smile was wide, bright, and utterly devoid of warmth. His eyes were a pale, flat blue, and they didn't seem to blink. "Right on time," he said, his voice smooth and even, like a synthesized voice from a GPS. He handed me 2 brand new, impossibly crisped $20 bills. "Keep the change." I handed him the pizza and the soda, and the transaction was over. But as I turned to leave, he cleared his throat. "One more thing, if you don't mind." I stopped. "Could you tell me how it looks from out there?" I was confused. "The pizza?" I asked. His smile never wavered. "No. The house. The experience. The warm glow. The friendly homeowner. The comforting aroma of a hot meal. Is the tableau convincing?" Tableau. It was such a strange, clinical word. I didn't know what to say. I glanced past him, into the house. The entryway was completely, totally empty. No photos on the walls, no rug on the floor, no furniture in sight. Just empty, beige, sterile space. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. Yeah, I stammered. "It looks nice. Looks like a home." The man's smile seemed to widen, if that was even possible. "Excellent. We value external feedback." He then closed the door with a soft, final click. I practically ran back to my car, my mind racing. The whole thing felt scripted, rehearsed, fundamentally wrong. I fumbled with my keys, started the engine, and threw the car in reverse. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the big picture window next to the front door. The man was standing there, in the middle of the empty living room. He wasn't holding the pizza. He was just standing perfectly still, his hands at his sides, that same vacant smile plastered on his face, watching me. Then, just as I pulled away, every single light in the house went out simultaneously, plunging it into the same absolute darkness as all the other houses on the street. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I spun the car around and sped down the muddy track, away from that place. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. The house was dark, but then a light flickered on in the house next to it, and then the next one, and the one after that. In a horrifying, silent cascade, lights were turning on in every single, unfinished, skeletal house down the entire street, each one revealing nothing but empty frames and hollow window sockets. It wasn't one man, it was a whole street of them. Just as I fishtailed back onto the paved road, my phone vibrated in my pocket, a text message from an unknown number. It had just 4 words. "Thank you for participating." I drove straight back to the shop, told my manager the customer was a no-show, and I'd lost the pizza in the mud. I paid for it out of my own pocket. I couldn't bring myself to explain what had really happened. Who would believe me? I quit the next day. I never went back to that part of town, but I still think about it. I think about that perfect, empty house and that man with the plastic smile. I wasn't delivering a pizza. I was delivering a prop. I was an unwitting actor who had stumbled onto a stage where something was practicing, learning how to be us. Every pizza delivery driver has their regulars. You get to know them by their orders, not their names. There's the Friday night family with the 2 pepperoni pizzas, the college kid with the late night meat lovers, and the quiet old lady who orders the same thing at the same time every single week. For me, that was Mrs. Gable. For 6 months, her standing order was a small beacon of predictability in a chaotic job. But over time, I came to dread that delivery, and I realized I wasn't just bringing her dinner. I was an unwitting participant in a quiet, weekly ritual held inside a house that was rotting from the inside out. I worked at one of those big chain pizzerias in a town small enough that our delivery area bled into the surrounding countryside. That's where Mrs. Gable lived. Her order would come in every Friday at 6:15 p.m. on the dot. 1 large cheese pizza, extra sauce, well done. Her house was at the very end of our delivery zone, a 15-minute drive that ended on a long, unpaved road. It was an old, 2-story farmhouse, gray and weathered, with a sagging porch and windows so grimy they looked like they were painted black. The place had a heavy, silent atmosphere, the kind that makes you want to leave your engine running. For the first few months, the routine was always the same. I'd pull up. She'd already be waiting behind the screen door, a stooped silhouette in the gloom. She'd pay with the exact amount in cash, including a $1 tip, her hand trembling slightly as she passed the money through the gap. She never spoke a word beyond a mumbled thank you. I never saw inside the house. The main door was always shut behind the screen, keeping the interior shrouded in darkness. It was creepy, sure, but it was reliable. The change was subtle at first. One Friday in early spring, she took longer to come to the door. When she finally opened it, I caught a glimpse inside. The house was as dark as I'd imagined, but I could make out several figures in what looked like a living room. There were 3 or 4 of them, sitting perfectly still on a couch and some armchairs, all facing a blank, dark television screen. Their posture was rigid, unnatural. "Family night," Mrs. Gable rasped, her voice dry as dead leaves, before quickly stepping in front of the gap to block my view. A few weeks later, I heard something new, a faint, tinny melody, like a child's music box, playing a simple, repetitive tune from somewhere deep within the house. The melody was slightly off-key, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Mrs. Gable seemed more agitated that day, her eyes darting nervously back into the darkness behind her as she paid. The creepiest delivery, the one before the last one, happened on a hot summer evening. I arrived and found the main door was slightly ajar. I knocked on the screen door frame and called her name, but got no answer. After a moment of hesitation, I nudged the screen door open. "Mrs. Gable," I called out, my voice sounding small and thin. The smell that rolled out of the house was overwhelming. It was a cloying mix of dust, potpourri, and something else. Something sickly sweet and chemical, like formaldehyde. I took a half step inside, and my eyes adjusted to the gloom. The figures were there, sitting in their usual spots. But now I could see them clearly. They weren't people. They were mannequins. Life-sized, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their painted faces frozen in serene, uncanny smiles, and standing. Among them was Mrs. Gable, not looking at me, but gently, lovingly stroking the synthetic hair of a mannequin shaped like a little girl. My blood ran cold. I started backing out, my heel catching on the threshold. The small noise made her look up, and her eyes, wide with panic, locked with mine. "Oh," she breathed, her face collapsing into a mask of pure terror. You weren't meant to see them." She took a step forward, her hands fluttering at her sides. "They're shy," she whispered, as if that explained everything. My own hand was on the screen door, ready to bolt. One had to get out of there. But she spoke again, her voice dropping to a desperate, conspiratorial whisper. "But it's Friday. They know it's Friday. They get so hungry when they know the pizza is here." As she said the word hungry, the tinny music box melody started up. Again, its off-key notes drilling into my skull. Mrs. Gable's eyes darted away from me and towards the mannequin of the little girl. A look of profound fear crossed her face. "You have to bring it in," she pleaded, her voice trembling. She gestured with a palsied hand to the warm pizza box in my grasp. "Please, just set it on the table. If they don't get their dinner, they become so terribly restless." The way she said restless sent a shockwave of pure, primal fear through me. I imagined those plastic limbs beginning to twitch, those painted smiles beginning to crack. I didn't say a word. I did the only thing I could. I dropped the pizza and the cash bag on the rotting wood of the porch, turned, and ran. I didn't stop until I was locked in my car, speeding down that dirt road with a cloud of dust behind me. I never looked back. I quit that night. I heard through the grapevine a few months later that the county had condemned the property. The official story was that the old woman who lived there had passed away years ago, and the house had been sitting abandoned ever since. But I know what I saw. I know I delivered a pizza to that house every Friday for 6 months. I don't know who or what Mrs. Gable was, and I certainly don't know what her family was. But some nights, when it's too quiet, I can still hear that tinny, off-key music. And I thank God I never found out what restless really meant. In the pizza delivery business, you learn to live by the special instructions. Don't ring the doorbell. Baby is sleeping. Extra garlic sauce, please. They're small, mundane requests. But once, I got a set of instructions that weren't mundane at all. They weren't a request. They felt like a desperate plea, or maybe a warning. 4 simple sentences, typed in all caps, that I should have followed to the letter. But I didn't. And because I hesitated, I heard what lived on the other side of the door. I was working a busy Saturday night shift, the kind where orders blur into one long, greasy marathon. Around 11 p.m., a prepaid online order came in for the Chamberlain Arms, a grim, brutalist high-rise apartment building on the edge of downtown that had a reputation for being one step away from condemnation. The order was simple: 1 cheese pizza, no toppings. It was the instructions that made me pause. Floor 9, apartment 9B. Leave pizza on mat. Do not knock. Do not call. Leave the hallway immediately. I showed it to my manager, who just shrugged. Probably an agoraphobe or something. Just do what it says. It's already paid for. So I took the delivery. The Chamberlain was even worse up close. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp concrete. The elevator creaked and groaned, its way to the 9th floor, its light flickering ominously. The hallway of the 9th floor was a long, narrow corridor with sickly yellow walls and a low ceiling that made the space feel claustrophobic. It was eerily silent. I found apartment 9B at the far end. The door was made of heavy steel, unlike the wooden doors of the other apartments, and it was reinforced with 2 extra deadbolts and a thick slide lock. The welcome mat on the floor was stained with something dark. Remembering the instructions, I quietly placed the pizza box on the mat. My job was done. I should have turned around and walked away. But as I stood up, I heard a sound from within the apartment that froze me in my tracks. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, a wet, dragging sound, shuffle, scrape. It was the sound of something heavy and limp being pulled across a bare floor. It was accompanied by a low, constant, guttural humming, like a faulty electrical transformer. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to obey the instructions and leave, but a morbid curiosity rooted me to the spot. I backed away slowly, just a few feet down the hall, partially hiding myself around a corner where I could still see the door. The shuffling, scraping sound grew louder as it approached the other side of the steel door. The humming intensified, vibrating through the floor, a low, menacing thrum that I could feel in my teeth. Then, the scraping stopped directly behind the door. The humming continued, and it was joined by a new sound, a series of loud, wet, sniffing noises coming from the base of the door. Whatever was in there was smelling the pizza. It was smelling me. Then, another sound cut through the humming. A human voice. It was a man, his voice a ragged, terrified whisper. "Easy," he whispered, his voice strained with effort. "Easy. Now, you have to wait. You know the rules." A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway washed over me. The customer was in there, but he wasn't the one who was hungry. The humming stopped. For a moment, there was a terrifying silence. Then, the scraping started again, but it was different this time. It was frantic. It was the sound of claw stick, heavy claw screeching against the inside of the steel door. Scree, scrape, scree. The sound was deafening in the narrow hall. The guttural humming returned, but now it was a series of choked, furious growls. The entire door began to vibrate from the force of whatever was throwing itself against it from the other side. I said, "Wait." The man inside screamed, his voice cracking with panic. I heard a loud crash of breaking glass, followed by a wet, sickening roar that was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't animal. It was deeper, more resonant, filled with a kind of ancient, hollow hunger. It was a sound that should not exist in a 9th-floor apartment. That's what finally broke my paralysis. I didn't bother with the elevator. I sprinted for the emergency stairwell. The sound of the man's terrified shouts and that monstrous, inhuman roaring chasing me the entire way down. I burst out into the lobby, and I didn't stop running until I was in my car. Peeling out of the parking lot, I never told anyone at work what really happened. I just said the customer wasn't home. They blacklisted the address after a few more failed delivery attempts from other drivers. I don't know what that man was keeping locked inside apartment 9B, but I know that pizza wasn't a meal for him. It was an offering. It was a desperate attempt to appease a hunger that lived behind a steel door, and I had been the one chosen to deliver the sacrifice. Sometimes, I still hear that roaring in my nightmares, and I know I wasn't just delivering a pizza that night. I was feeding a monster.